What is up, everyone? I hope you're having a fantastic day. I'm really excited to show you what I got prepared for you, so let's get right to it. If you don't have the started project, there's a GitHub repository that I'll have on the screen, so head on over there and download it so you can follow along. To get an idea of what we'll be doing, this is what the final project will look like. A couple of things to expect right off the bat. First, you'll learn how to build that custom card view that the App Store features. The main attraction of this video, the custom transition, will also be implemented and explained. Now, we won't be using any storyboards. Everything will be done programmatically, so yeah, you'll thank me later. There will be no third-party dependencies or CocoaPods. You'll be able to run this project right after you download it from GitHub. This project supports both the latest iPhones as well as the notchless devices. And last but not least, the swipe down to dismiss will also be covered in this video. Throughout this video, you will hear me mention two views, the Today view and the Detail view. The Today view is the first view that we'll see when we open up the app, and the Detail view is the view that we'll transition to when tapping on a card view. The Today view is composed of a few things. We have a date label, the Today label, a user image view, a cards table view to hold all our card views, and all these are subviews of a scroll view. The Detail view is a bit simpler. We have a card view, a close button, a text label, and just like in our Today view, all these are subviews of a scroll view. Now let's have a look at the card view. There are three types of card views: the app of the day, the app article, and the app collection. The app of the day card view is composed of a container view to hold all the other views, a background image, a featured title label for app of the day, a shadow view to give our card a very nice effect, and an app view at which we'll take a closer look in a moment. The app article card view is composed of a container view, a background image, a subtitle label, a title label, a description label, a shadow view, and our app view is set to none for this type of card view. Finally, the app collection. This card view is composed, as you might guess, a container view, a subtitle label, a title label, a shadow view, and a table view containing a list of app views in a horizontal type. Let's have a quick look at the app view. In both the featured and horizontal state, the app view contains the same amount of views. The only thing is, they're arranged differently. The app view contains a title label, an icon image view, a subtitle label, a get button, and a button subtitle label. The card view has two modes, card and full. In the card mode, the card view has rounded corners and padding on the sides, so it would look great in a table view. In the full mode, the card view has straight corners, the image expands to the sides, and the padding is 0. Now you'll see later why this information is useful. Now that you have an idea of what the card view looks like, let's move on to the main attraction, the transition. What we want is to tap on the card view, on the Today view, and have it animate into the Detail view with that card view at the top. Of course, there are many ways to present a view controller, and most of the time we choose the default presentation methods and just set a model presentation style if you want to customize the experience. But in this case, we'll use something that you don't stumble upon that often, a transitioning delegate. In order to create that custom transition that we keep seeing every time we open up the App Store, we need to create an object that conforms to this protocol. When implementing this object that I've just mentioned, we'll have the ability to perform different animations based on whether a view controller is being presented or dismissed. Now to get started, let's open up the started project from the GitHub repository. If you don't have it already, I'll have the link on the screen. Now the started project should work fine on Xcode 11 and 12. I myself am using Xcode 12 for this video. Now, in the project navigator, create a new file in the transitions folder. Let's call this Card Transition Manager. We'll go ahead and declare the class, and since the Apple documentation requires this to be an object, we'll inherit from NSObject. Now I want to conform to a couple of protocols in order to set up our transition manager. The first one is UI View Controller Animated Transitioning. And the second one is UI View Controller Transitioning Delegate. The first of these requires us to implement two methods in which we'll specify the duration of our transition and the animation itself. The latter will help us determine whether the view controller is being presented or dismissed. In order to keep track of the state of our transition, we'll create an enum called Card Transition Type. Now, a transition can either be a presentation or a dismissal. Now, we'll create a couple of properties in our Card Transition Manager object. The first one, a transition duration. Which tells us how long the transition should take. A transition, which is of type Card Transition Type. And by default, we'll set this to presentation. And lastly, we'll add a shrink duration, which tells us how long the shrink animation should take. Looking back at the final product, we'll see that whenever we tap on a card, it shrinks first, and then it expands. We'll go ahead and finish up setting the protocol methods. We'll want to return the transition duration in our transition duration using transition context method. The animation controller for presented method is called whenever a view controller is being presented. So we'll set here the transition to be presentation. And the animation controller for dismissed is called whenever a view controller is being dismissed. So we'll set the transition to dismissal. Before we go any further, just so we don't forget, I want to add the Card Transition Manager to our Today view. So that'll be used whenever we tap on a cell. Let's open up the Today view and create our Transition Manager right up here. If you head down to Table View Did Select Row At, you'll see that the detail view is presented here. Now we want to add our transition manager to the detail view transitioning delegate. So we'll do that here. All right, let's check if what we've done so far is working. We just need to call the complete transition for our complete transition context method in order to notify the system that the animation is done. Alright, let's build and run this. Now if we tap on a card, nothing happens, except that the container view of the transition context is displayed. For now, it is empty and transparent, so that's why we can see the today view. But if we click on the debug view hierarchy button down here, you'll see that there's a view on top of our today view. Now that is the container view of the transition context where we'll be adding our animation. If we look back at how the transition is going to look, we'll see that there are a couple of more things happening at the same time. For starters, there's a darker background, a blur, and a white container view expanding to the screen. So we'll go ahead and add these views to our card transition manager. So here we're declaring a blur effect, and we're going to set it to a light style. And then we're going to create our visual effect view from our blur effect. And then we're simply going to return our visual effect view. Next, we want to declare our dimming view. And we're going to want to set the background color of this to black. And lastly, we'll declare our white view. And we'll set the background color for this to white. Next, the way that the card view transition works is that we'll make a copy of the card that we tapped on and place it onto our container view of the transition context. First, we'll remove all the subviews from our container view so that we start off with a clean slate. Next, let's create a helper method to add our blur view and dimming view to this container view. Now we're going to give our blur effect view the frame of the container view. We're going to set the initial alpha value of this to 0 because we want it to be transparent at first, and then gradually increase its alpha value. And then we just want to add it to our container view. We'll do the same thing for our dimming view. And we're going to add this to our container view. Now let's call this method right after we clean the container view. Great. Next, what we'll need to do is create a copy of the card that we just tapped on. First, we'll need to somehow get a hold of the card view that we tapped on. We know that the card view is in the today view, so how do we get access to it? Luckily, the transition context can help us out with this. By calling the viewController for key on our transition context, we'll have access to both the viewController that we are transitioning from, as well as the viewController that we're transitioning to. Since this transition manager will be used for both the presentation and the dismissal, the from view will be different in each one of these cases. When we are presenting, the from view will be our today view. And when we're dismissing, the from view will be our detail view. So just keep this in mind. Inside our today view, we have a method called selected cell card view, which returns the card view that we tapped on. We are using a generic UI table view cell to which we are passing a UI view. This cell takes this view and pins it to the top, bottom, and sides of the cell's content view. So in order to retrieve the card view from the cell that we tapped on, we simply return the view from the UI table view cell. Back to our transition manager. In order to know which card we tapped on, we'll call the selected cell card view method for our from view or to view based on the transition that we are performing. Let's say card view is going to be, we're going to use an if statement here. So we're going to check if the transition is a presentation. Then we'll use our from view and cast it as a today view, and call the selected cell card view for that view controller. Otherwise, we'll know that the to view is going to be the today view. So we're going to do the same. Now we'll want to have a guard statement here. In case none of these work, we want to simply return. Now we need to create a copy of this card view and add it to our container view. To do this, we'll create another method inside our transition manager that will do just that. In order to initialize a card view, we need a card view model and an app view. Since the selected card view already has that information, we'll use those. So we'll grab the card model from the card view that we tapped on. We'll set the card model view mode to card, because when we're presenting, the card view mode is set to card with the rounded corners. Next, we need the app view, which is formed using an app view model. Luckily, the card view already has this model, so we'll just use that. Finally, we'll create our card view copy using the card view initializer. And we're going to return the card view copy. We'll go ahead and use this function and create our copy. And add it to our container view. If we build and run this, and tap on a cell, we'll see a couple of things. First of all, the card view copy is not where we want it to be. To solve this, we need to give it a frame. More precisely, the frame of the card view that we tapped on relative to the today view. To achieve this, we need to retrieve the absolute card view frame relative to our today view and add it to our container view. So we'll use the convert_to method provided by Apple. Now, this method converts the rectangle from the received, our card view, to the coordinate system of the receiver. If we pass in nil, we'll get the card view's location relative to the today view, which is what we need. Now we'll set the frame for our card view copy and update the frames. The second thing we need to do is that we need to hide the card view that we tapped on so we won't have a duplicate. So we'll add this up here. Now if we build and run this and tap on a cell, nothing happens. But this is actually what we want. If we click on the Debug View Hierarchy button, we can see that the card view is now hidden and the card view copy was successfully added to our container view. So what we're seeing right now in the simulator is actually the card view copy. Perfect. Now on to our animation. As we discussed before, in the final product, when we tap on a card, the card view shrinks and then it expands. So let's make our shrink animator first. Create a new method called makeShrinkAnimator, in which we'll create a UI view property animator where we'll scale down the card view copy with a transform and dim the background just a little bit. So we'll return a UI view property animator with a duration. We're going to pass in the shrink duration, an ease out animation, and here we'll implement the views that we want to animate. First, we're going to want to transform our card view that we passed in, our card view copy, and make it a bit smaller using the CG affine transform. Now remember that the numbers that we pass in there are going to be between 0 and 1. The closer it is to 1, the closer the dimensions are to the original size. And we'll want to briefly show the dimming view. Now for our expand animator. We'll need the card view, the container view, and a Y origin to move our card view to. Now, we want this animation to be a bit more bouncy, because when we look at the animation in slow motion, we can see that the detail view controller oscillates slightly when the card moves into place. For this, we'll use some spring timing parameters. The values for these parameters are more of an art than a science. When the dampening ratio is less than 1, this will oscillate more. So we'll definitely want this less than 1. But this depends on your taste and preferences. The same goes for the initial velocity. We want the Y value to be greater than 0, so it moves towards the final position. If you want to find out more, you can read the Apple documentation. We'll use these parameters to declare our animator. Now the duration of this is going to be our transition duration, the entire duration, minus the shrink duration. And the timer parameters will be the ones that we just created. We want to add some animations to this. In the Add Animations block, we need to transform the card view copy back to its original size. So we'll do that using the transform property. Next, we'll need to straighten the corners of our card view copy, and we'll do this by accessing its container view and updating the corner radius of that. We'll also need to pin it to the top of the screen, or in this case our Y origin. While expanding, we'll also change the blur alpha. And finally, we're going to update the frames. Now we know that we need to call the shrink animator first and then the expand animator. So to not clutter the code too much, we'll create a new method to chain these animations together. Let's call this method move and convert to card view. Now this method takes in 3 parameters. The first one, our card view that we want to move and convert. Next, the container view. The Y origin that we want to move our card view to. And we'll also need a completion handler where we'll do some cleanup before we complete the transition. And here, we'll declare our animators. First, the shrink animator. And the expand animator. Now, using the UI view property animator makes it so much easier to chain animations together. So we'll go ahead and add the completion blocks for both our animators. Now this code will run whenever the shrink animation is done. And this code will run whenever the expand animation is done. So obviously after the shrink animation is done, we'll want to start our expand animator. But we still want to do a few things before that. First, we'll need to update the frames of our card view. And second, we want to update the card view mode to full so that when it reaches the detail view, it'll be pinned to the sides, top, and bottom of the card view. When the expand animation is finished, we'll just call our completion handler to notify the method that we're done. And lastly, we'll just need to start our shrink animation. Alright, all that's left to do is call the method whenever the view controller is presenting. So inside our animate transition using transition context method, we'll do a check to see if we're presenting or dismissing the view controller. Now in both these cases, we'll want to call the complete transition in order to notify the system that the animation is done. In our presentation block, we know that the to view is actually the detail view, so we'll use this information. We also need to add the view of the detail view to our container view and hide it during our animation so it doesn't interfere with the card view copy. Now this property hides all the relevant views from the detail view, such as the card view, the text, and the close button. To start the animation, let's just call the move and convert card view method. We'll pass in the card view copy, our container view. Now when we're presenting, we want to pin the card to the top of the detail view, so we're going to pass in 0. And whenever we're done, we need to do a couple of things. First, we need to unhide the views of the detail view. Next, we'll want to remove the card view copy from our container view. And lastly, unhide our original card view from the today view. Now this needs to be done in the dismissal block as well. Alright, let's build and run this and see what we get. Let's tap on a card. Wow, I'm blown away by this every time. Everything looks great, but there's still a piece missing. At the beginning of the video, we added a UI view to our card transition manager called White View. This view will help us create that expanding effect for our card view. Now, since we want the white view to be animated in sync with our card view copy, we'll place it right above the shadow view of our card view copy. Let's go back to our animating transition using transition context and add the white view. We want it to have the same dimensions as the container view of our card view copy, as well as the rounded corners. And lastly, we'll insert this above the shadow view of the card view copy so that it's between the shadow view and the container view. Now, to animate the white view, we need to make a few changes to our expand animator method. So let's head down there. Right here, we'll want to straighten the corners and sync up the frame right before we call layout if needed. So we'll want to straighten the corners, and we'll want the final frame to be the same size as our container view. So basically the whole screen. Let's build and run this and see what happens. Tap on a card. Wow, now that's beautiful. Take a moment to enjoy it. Now when we tap on the close button, it's still that old dismissal. So we'll want to take care of it. Basically, the dismissal is the exact same opposite of the presentation. We'll need to revert the white view back to its original position along with the card view copy, show the original card view from the today view, and remove the card view copy from the screen. Easy, right? Well, if you can pause the video, I suggest you try this on your own and check back here to verify your solution. Back to our transition manager. To make things a bit simpler and make our lives easier, we're going to add a few properties to our transition type enum. We'll need to add the following information based on whether we're presenting or dismissing. First, we'll want to know the blur alpha. So when we're presenting, the blur alpha is going to be 1, and when we're dismissing, we want that to be 0. Next, the dim alpha. The dim alpha is going to be the same as our blur alpha, only half the alpha. Now the corner radius of our card view copy is also going to be different. When we're presenting, that's going to be 20, and when we're dismissing, it's going to be 0 because we're copying the full card and we need the corners to be straight. Next, we need the card mode. So when we are presenting, our card view copy is going to be of type card, and when we're dismissing is going to be full. And just to make our life a bit easier, we'll create a next property which will tell us what the next transition is going to be. So when we're presenting, the next transition is going to be a dismissal, and when we're dismissing, the next transition is going to be a presentation. Now let's go ahead and replace the constant values from our card transition manager with the properties that we've just created. First, in the add background views, we'll replace these with the values of the next transition, because here we'll need it to be 0 when we're presenting. Same for the dimming alpha. Next, in our create card view copy, we'll pass in the card mode of our copy. If we scroll down to our animate transition method, we also need to update the corner radius of our white view. Now here, we'll want to update the initial frame of the white view, because when we are dismissing, the frame will actually be the size of our container view, or in this case, the whole screen. So if we're presenting, we'll do as before. Otherwise, we'll have the frame of the container view. Moving on to our dismissal block, we'll want to hide the views of our detail view, just like we did for the presentation. But this time, the detail view is the from view. We also need to set the frame of the card view copy, and we'll just use the card view's frame from the detail view and build a CG rect from that to start the animation from the top of the screen. Now we're doing this because the Y coordinate differs on an iPhone 10. We'll use the width of the card view from the detail view. And we'll just force and wrap this. And also the height. Just like in our presentation block, we'll call the move and convert card view method, but instead of 0, we'll use the Y coordinate of the original card view from our today view. Now remember that we created this absolute card view frame that is actually the frame of the original card view in the today view. So we'll use that here. We'll pass in the card view copy, again, our container view, and as the Y origin, our absolute card view frame of the card view in the today view, and we need its Y coordinate. Let's just move these into the completion block, and we should be done here. Now onto our animators. We need to make a few changes here. We won't need to change anything in our shrink animator since we won't be using it in our dismissal, but we do have to make a few changes to our expand animator. Well, first we need to change the name of the method because we'll be expanding and contracting the card view. We'll need to change the constants that we have in this method with the ones we've provided in the transition type enum. First, the corner radius. Here we'll use next because we'll need 0 when we're presenting and 20 when we're dismissing. But right now, we're using 20 when we're presenting for the corner radius of our card view. So we need the next. We'll go ahead and update this function as well. And we also want to update the dimming view alpha here. We'll also need to update the frame for our white view so that it contracts to the correct frame. To do this, we'll move it under the layout if needed and update it based on whether we're presenting or dismissing. So when we're presenting, we want the white view to expand to the full size of the container view. Otherwise, we want it to contract to the size of the card view copy that we just passed in. All right, now that we're done here, we need to update the move and convert card view method to support the dismissal as well. For starters, we only need the shrink animator whenever we're presenting. Let's update our property as well. When we're dismissing, we want to start the animation of our expand contract animator. We'll move this up here. And when we're dismissing, we also want to update the card view copy layout to the card mode so that we have those nice rounded corners. Now to make use of the transition type enum, we'll update the card mode values. And we're done. Let's try it out. Let's build and run this. We'll tap on a cell. It expands. And when we tap on the close button, it shrinks. Awesome. All right. Now that you got things figured out, from now on, the possibilities are infinite. So as you've probably seen in the App Store app, there's another way to dismiss the detail view. And that way is to swipe down on the screen so that the entire view shrinks, rounds, and the blur appears underneath it to reveal the today view. You might think there's some dark magic going on here and that it's really hard to replicate, but in fact it's pretty simple. We'll do what everyone else does nowadays. We'll make a screenshot and play around with that. In order to create a UI image from our detail view, or any view for that matter, is actually pretty simple. Now there are a few ways to do this, but the easiest and most high-level way is using the UI kit framework. Now to create our snapshot method, let's go to our project navigator, go to UI, extensions, and UI view extensions. Let's create our method, call it create snapshot. First, we'll use an image context. Now the image context tells the environment that we are about to create an image. To start it, we have to configure it with some options. It's called UI graphics, begin, image context with options. Wow, okay. So we pass in the size of the view that we want to capture, which will also be the size of our new image. So we're just going to pass in the frame size. Next, we'll let the context know whether it is transparent or opaque. In this case, we're going to pass in false. And lastly, we pass in the scale. Conveniently, if we pass in 0, the API will use the main phone screen scale instead, which is what we need. In order to actually create our snapshot, we need to call the draw hierarchy method. Next, we use the UI kit's UI graphics get image from current context method to create our image. Try saying that 5 times fast. Now this is the method that actually creates the image. And finally, we need to call the UI graphics and image context to let the application know that we are done with the image creation and we can move on. Now let's go make our snapshot. Head on over to your detail view and create a new property up here called Snapshot View. which is of type UI image view. And we need to do a couple of things here. First, we're going to declare it. We want to clip it to bounds. We want to give it a background color of white. We want to give it a shadow, so we'll do that by giving it a shadow color, which is going to be UI color.black.cg color. We'll give it an opacity of 0.2. We'll give it a radius and a shadow offset. And for now, we just want to hide it. Now, we need a method to create the snapshot when the view loads. Let's name this method down here. Create snapshot of view. So we create the snapshot image from our view. Next, we're going to set this image to our snapshot view. Small typo there. And we need to add it to our scroll view. Now we'll have to give our snapshot view a frame and take into account the top padding, or aka the notch, in order for this to work properly. Now let's set the frame of our snapshot view. Now we need to call the create snapshot of view method whenever we're done presenting. So to do this, let's head on over to our card transition manager and to the presentation block. We'll need to add this right before we complete the transition. So detail view dot create snapshot of view. Now this should take a snapshot of the screen right before we complete the transition. So this way we are sure that the snapshot is taken right after the animation is finished. By calling this method as soon as the view loads, we won't need to worry about the snapshot having any top or bottom offsets. The next step is to listen to the scroll view. We'll set the scroll view delegate inside our create snapshot of view method, so we can take advantage of the scroll view did scroll method, which will be triggered every time we scroll either up or down. Now we've already conformed to the UI scroll view delegate up here, and if you scroll down to the bottom of the file, you'll find the scroll view did scroll method. Now in here we'll need a couple of things. First, the Y position for the dismissal, which we'll set to 20, and we'll also need to keep track of the Y content offset, so we'll know when to dismiss. The Y content offset of a scroll view is negative if we scroll up and positive if we scroll down. Now, in order to support the iPhone 10 and other devices with a notch, we need to account for the top padding when we're making our calculations. We'll go ahead and account for the top padding. So no matter what device we're on, the Y content offset will always be 0 at the top of the scroll view. So to get a better understanding of this, if the Y content offset is 0 and we drag down on our scroll view, the Y content offset will be negative. We want the scroll view to bounce only when we're dragging our finger on the screen. We'll know this by using the isTracking property of the scroll view. Otherwise, we'll just want to stop and not have that bounce. To enable this bounce back, we'll do this in the scroll view did end decelerating method. Now, if the content offset is less than 0 and the user is dragging on the screen, then we want to hide the views from our detail view and just show the snapshot view. Otherwise, we want to do the opposite. We use the isTracking property here as well. Now, the more we drag down, the more we want to shrink our snapshot view, and the way we'll achieve this is by transforming it to a specific scale. We'll calculate this scale based on the Y content offset. Now, we know the scale has to be between 0 and 1. We use 100 as our measuring value, from which we'll subtract the Y content offset, and we're going to divide that by 100 to get an approximate number between 0 and 1. And now what we have to do with the scale is just apply it to our snapshot view. Here we also need to change the corner radius of the snapshot view based on the Y content offset. Now the corner radius of the snapshot view, we'll want it to be 20 at max. Otherwise, we'll just want it to be the absolute value of the Y content offset. So first, we'll compare the absolute value of the Y content offset to our position of dismissal. And if that's greater, we'll just use the 20 for the maximum corner radius. Otherwise, we'll just use the absolute value of the content offset. And finally, we just need to check if we've reached the dismissal position, and if we did, we'll just dismiss the view. All right, let's build and run this. Tap on a cell, it expands. Now let's drag down. All right, that's it. Now, of course, there's a lot of things you can do with this. For starters, we could add a close button to our transition so it won't appear out of the blue like that. The same thing goes for the text. What we want to do now is add our close button to our transition. This way, when the close button is shown, it'll be seamless. So let's use the close button declared in our detail view and add it to our card transition manager right under our white view. Next, we want to add the close button to our container view. First, we want to set the appearance based on the background type. Now we want to add the close button to the container view of our card view copy, so that way it will stay in place whenever the card view copy animates. Now, these constraints are going to be similar with the ones from our detail view, so we're just going to copy those from here. The only difference is that instead of the view top anchor and the view right anchor, we're going to have the shadow view of our card view copy. If we're presenting, we want to set the alpha of the close button to 0. Same goes for the dismissal. And inside our expand contract animator, we want to update the alpha value of our close button. And that should be it. Let's build and run this and see what we get. Now let's tap on a card view, and we can see that the close button animates along with it. If we tap on close, it animates down with it. Awesome. Now to make sure you got the hang of this, I suggest you handle the text. To wrap things up on our close button, I just want to make a last adjustment. When we scroll down, we see that the close button is white on a white background, which is not a great user experience. So let's head back to our detail view and create another method at the bottom called update close button. And we'll pass the Y content offset, so we'll know when to change the close button. Now we know for a fact that the height of our card view is 450. So we're going to compare that to our Y content offset. But we have the top padding, so we'll have to take that into account. Now in this case, we want to set the image of our close button to UI image light on dark. So that is the light close button. Otherwise, we want to set the close button's image to UI image named dark on light. But there's another case. There's the case when we are at the top and the background type of our card view is dark. In that case, we don't want to put a dark close button on a dark background. So we'll set that here. Now we just have to call our function right after we update the Y content offset. Alright, let's build and run this. Tap on a card, scroll down, and we got the dark close button. That's cool. Alright, now if you want to try something on your own, try dealing with this text right here. Have it animate along with the transition. If you have any questions regarding this video and this presentation, please feel free to reach out. I'll be more than happy to help you. Thank you for watching and have an amazing day. Peace.